All right, happy to see everyone. I hope you can hear me. I think there's a few seconds delay, so I don't get instant feedback, but hope it works. I'm seeing the presentation and I'm seeing the live chat in a different style as you do, but so I can skip slides and things. And hope it works out. I never did a YouTube live stream before, and I'm at least as excited as you are. I think a couple of more people will pour in, so I'll just begin talking for maybe 1 or 2 minutes. And yeah, so my name is Vinzenz. I am also a junior entrepreneur, such as all of you are. I'm from Berlin, Germany, and I'm a junior entrepreneur since 3 years now. Joined BCPro, my JEE. I put on all the merch we have in 2017, while I started my first master thesis in Biotechnology. And I was always keen also to go beyond research in management. And in the JEE, I found exactly what I searched for. Great people, new friends, and finally also then lots of projects. As Elizabeth told, hello Vinzenz, I hope you can hear me. I'm still not so sure if you just see my mouth moving. And I'll just assume so, since I don't see anything different stated in the comments. Why quality management and me? It started kind of early. Within my Bachelor of Life Science Engineering, I started having a working job as a student. Okay, we can hear you, Vinzenz. I am glad. Thanks, Sarah. And that working student job was in a lab, in a sensoric lab, where we tested different pH devices for quality, within product management, basically. And from there, I shifted internally within the company towards their quality management department, learned about business processes. So I think we'll talk about today. And also, then got more and more involved into quality management, even if it's not a typical subject within biotechnology. And afterwards, I started taking classes within it. There's a faculty at my university teaching quality management, and then there I basically got the theory from a few courses, I think like 6 or 7 in total. And when I started my JEE then later on, after being at the IT department, I quickly became head of quality management. I'm just passionate about the topic basically, and hope that I have improved it a little bit within my JEE. And since knowledge is basically the only thing that multiplies when you share it, I am now very happy to conduct this training. After doing my TTT in Brussels last year, together with the board of JEE Europe, they consulted me a few weeks ago if I not want to do a training, and then we said why not, because everyone has nothing to do anyway, has to sit at home, and so let's make use of that and push everyone to keep on with his JEE movement, keep on with motivation, and gain new insights and new development. There has been another training, as I saw it, on corporate finance, which is also a very interesting topic. And now we are starting here with quality management. I was previously mostly consulting with Sarah, which is also in the chat, about organization and everything, and I want to thank her very much for doing so. It worked out great. And she told me last numbers were 220 different attendees from 10 different countries and 70 GEs. I won't think that everyone will be here actually, but it's still an awesome number. That's the reason why I'm doing it with YouTube Live, because we just couldn't think of a better platform to handle so many people. I currently don't see the number of attendants, which is okay for me. it would maybe make me just more nervous than I am already. But yeah, I guess it's fine. My camera is below my screen. That's why it kind of looks a little bit weird when I do webcamming, because I always look above the camera to my screen. But yeah, well, that's how the laptop is designed. So don't feel irritated if I don't look in the camera too much. Now we are 133. Okay, well, Twitch would also be an option, but yeah, I didn't have a YouTube live conto, and I don't think we have a Twitch conto SG Europe. Okay, so it's 5 minutes past. I think we will be starting. Yeah, so quality management. I'm very happy that you all are here. And we'll talk about quality management in two aspects, basically, JEEs and projects. Some basic rules. Since we are a lot of people, yeah, something obvious, use the chat to interact because there's basically no other way. I hope we don't, we're shutting down the comments now a little bit, so it's nice that you introduce yourself, but if we now want to do a Q&A later on, or if I want to like keep up with what you are asking, then here I hope that the chat won't be too crowded and there's not too much happening, so I can still follow up during giving the presentation. So all the views to the right will be towards the chat. Okay, also there's, as I told you, a delay of, I think we did a test run there, it was like 20 seconds, so what I'm saying will be arrive at your screen 20 seconds later, which is very weird for me, but I guess the chat will be a little bit delayed. I have to keep that in mind. So if I'm asking your questions, I have to wait a little bit, so that will be where the pauses are coming from. Also, everything is recorded and then uploaded to the JEE Europe channel. I think also the chat, but I'm not so sure. So don't share your credit card numbers or anything else private. And yeah, with that, I think we can keep going. Yeah, I thought about doing an agenda, but then I switched to just a few bullet points, what we are going to talk about, because it was all kind of smashed into each other, and there are fluid boundaries between the topics. We want to first talk about the scope of quality management, so what's my understanding of the topic itself. Then I want to emphasize on business process management, since that's like the thing I did the most basically in recent times. Then I want to talk about knowledge management specifically for JEEs, as I think it's one of the major tasks and hopefully one of the major motivation for all of you to take part here. Together with that, I want to talk about process implementation, so how you can improve your quality management within your JEE with some best practices, or at least some guidance how we in my JEE did it. Then I want to briefly talk about QM projects as a field for junior enterprises, so to provide that as a professional service for our clients, as we in our JEE do it kind of frequently. It's one of our main businesses basically. And also I like over the all topics, I want to have a constant Q&A to read in the chat, so I can like emphasize on the topics you are most interested in. Overall, it won't be too many slides. I will talk a lot and hope that's okay. If there's in the end a topic we want to talk more about, we can jump to the slides back again. Or also, if you seem very interested in a topic I'm talking about, we can elaborate or emphasize on different stuff. So as a first little motivator, why should quality management concern you? Why should you all participate? For me, in my view and my definition, I see quality management kind of everywhere, because it basically is in every interaction that is happening with two parties. There is quality management, like the basic concept in communication, where you have the sender and the receiver. You have the interaction, and it's always a level of quality within that. So how well is the communication perceived? Do I Am I able to send the message that I want to send? And this kind of comes from communication theory, but I think it really well fits also on like the basic concepts of quality management. So first, some definitions. I know that quality management is perceived as a kind of dry topic, but with this more like psychological communication approach, I feel like it's very close to humans and very close to human beings. So I have a very different view on it being a very dry topic and just with statistics and numbers. That's also part of it, but to my view, not the main part. And I'll just read it out loudly. It's from the international standard, the ISO 9000, where they define what quality is. And quality is determined by the ability to satisfy customers at the intent and unintended impact of relevant interested parties. So that's basically the broadest thing anyone ever could come up with, in my view. But since it's a standard that should fit to the automotive sector as well as aerospace as well as the hairdresser next door, it has to be very broad. It's typically for standards if you've ever read some of them. And then we have the definition for quality management system, which is just basically the activities that you are doing and conducting to achieve desired results. So to put it again into a little bit more visual, there is a product or service of any kind basically. And of course it has properties and different attributes towards it. For example, my pullover is red. The lining is specific, the printing is specific, and everything has quality to it. And there's always expectations towards the customer. So everything that interacts with another thing, as I said before, there are expectations in that kind of customer, and the customer can be basically everyone or everything. It can be most obvious the client of a project. It can be your partner. It can be the next department next to your department within a corporation. It can be the law. And what quality is basically the grade of fulfillment. So how much do I fulfill the expectations? And that's very vague, basically, because expectations aren't always so clear. And I think most of you know that from project management. How do I satisfy my customer? Well, to deliver like excellent quality, I of course have to know the expectations of my customer pretty clearly. Only then I'm able to think about how can I fulfill those expectations specifically. And in the end, the level of quality is the grade of fulfillment of those expectations. To just set the setting. Then a large slide, a little bit of history, like where's quality management coming from, where is it going also. And first, it pretty much was quality control. It started during the industrialization because that was basically the first time where we had multiple stakeholders within the manufacturing process. Before we had maybe the smith who is doing everything on his own, and then there is the horse which is happy afterwards. But when we started building cars and getting more complex products, there were supply chains, there were vendors, there were buyers. Construction got way more complicated, parts became way more. And so you have to care and had to care about the interactions. Very specifically within supply chains, if I'm fabricating the first part falsely, then in the next step or in like 3 steps down the road, everything will get messed up. And it first started with quality control, which is pretty easy. You look at something, compare it to what it should be, and if it's wrong, you just throw it away basically. It's very ineffective because you throw away a lot of stuff. There is a very famous ad of Volkswagen, that's why I put the Beetle here, where they had a lot of people with like research people, and the ad said, "This car you're buying surpassed every one of them." And that was basically the understanding. So we build something, then we test it if it's good enough, and if it isn't good enough, we sort it out. And only if it's good enough, we can let it through towards our customers. So only if we achieve the high standards. That's still kind of true in various sectors, this approach, and it's still an overall approach, especially in pharmaceuticals. Basically, there you have very high quality control in the end, and if it doesn't work, then you throw away the product. And it's clear why we do that in pharmaceuticals, because it's just critical if something goes wrong at all. From those very looking at the end, at the final product, it evolved towards quality steering and quality assurance, where we more watch during not just at the results, but looking more at the process of manufacturing and how can we influence quality. So where does it come from? Why is the result like it is? So asking more complex questions. Then we came to quality management, and that's our main topic today. So we won't talk so much about quality control, where there is also, like, you could do a whole teaching about that. But we are talking about quality management today, which is like really steering the quality that is there. But it evolved from there, and basically it grew, as you can see it. First, we very much looked at the end. If we have a final product, we just looked on the product, it's there, and if it's wrong, we throw it away. And then we basically zoomed out towards the whole value chain and towards the manufacturing chain. And with quality management, we start looking basically at the whole company. And within total quality management and especially operational excellence, as I showed you a graph there, it basically looks at everything. So there's a big cultural aspect in it. There's a leadership engagement, which is stated there, employee involvement. So way, way beyond looking at the final product and asking yourself, why does this car not work? It's more like, why is this organization as it is? How can I improve the organization as a whole? Also taking into account vendors and the whole supply chain. So it more evolved towards a management strategy, basically, besides being just a set of tools within production. But still, it comes from production, and that's what we must not forget. So one famous thing, what I want to show you about, one method, is the PDCA cycle. It's intuitive, I think, for most who have ever heard project management teaching or are familiar with concepts of project management. It basically divides everything into 4 steps. Everything you want to do, everything you want to start, everything you want to improve. So the fundamental thing is to give structure. And we should always consider that quality management mostly is a thing to structure. So within the plan phase, the first phase, we establish what we want to achieve. Within the do phase, as it says, we do the stuff that we plan to do. Then we check the stuff that we that we conducted, if we achieved the results that we planned. So there's kind of a feedback loop. And then we act accordingly. We'll later see that cycle again for an example that I take. But it's one of the very basic methods that you use within quality management, and I think it's very intuitive, as I said, to everyone who did project management. Then another, I would say, one of the most important methods, and especially for JEEs, but we'll get there, is continuous improvement as a concept. So if I iterate this PDCA cycle over time, I want to continuously improve myself to get better and better. But how do I do that? So that's a cycle. And to make it go up the hill, basically, as it's seen in that visual, we use standards and templates. And I really want to emphasize standards and templates as a tool for JEEs to be able to teach the new ones how things work and how can you improve stuff. And we also will see that framework later on to use standards and templates as a measurement for continuous improvement over time. All right. And then another main thing is processes that we are going to talk about. So within theory, maybe that's not so much common theory, but more funny. And the visual, we have an input, then something happens, and then we have an output. And that's pretty much describing processes from their core. There is a more complex way, and now we are more getting into the typical visualizations of processes for a company. So there are customers of a company of any kind, and very different customers. As I said before, customers can be internal, can be your neighbor, can be whatever, can be your partner. And those customers has expectations and requirements. And then you, as a company or as a person, want to do something and give that thing back to the customer. For example, the customer wants to drive around, then I'm founding a company which does stuff, and at the end I'm giving cars to customers. And within the organization, many things are happening. And typically those things that are happening within an organization are divided into three different ones, three different kind of processes. In the middle, we have the main process. Our main processes, there are normally not so many, because in the example, a car manufacturer, well, his main process is manufacturing cars. So getting the stuff, building everything together and selling it towards the customer. But to be able to do that, you of course need a lot of processes around that, which are not really helping, but which are necessary, basically. And here we divide between the management processes, which is, as it says, like for steering, for strategy, for management. And the other thing are the support processes, which is, for example, human resources, which is also quality management itself, since quality management will never build a car, but it always will just help to build better cars. So quality management in itself is part of the support processes. Also something like finance. You don't do finance because you want to build cars, you do finance because you have to, otherwise you mustn't build cars by law, because you have requirements that you have to fulfill. Support processes are basically in each company the same, also the management processes, and where companies differ is the main process. But in basically every company there will be an HR department, because you have people there, and so you need someone to support the people conducting the main processes. So this is a very generic approach, or a very generic division of processes, which you can apply basically to every company ever on the whole planet. And we also get later to that concept. All right. Here's some more characteristics of processes. They always have those things, or need to have those things, otherwise it will get tough to deal with them and to work with them. And I'll just go through them very briefly. It's kind of self-explanatory, I hope. We have measurable input. So like in the graph before, there we have a measurable input, it's a worm. We also have measurable output, which is the egg. And the next point here. And we have measurable added value. Humans like eggs, but humans don't like worms, basically. So there's value created. Then important thing is I have to be able to control and steer the process that is happening. So if it's just something out of my range, it doesn't really make sense to deal with it, because I cannot change it anyway. So why should I bother? Then the next thing, and that's takes a lot of complexity, or gives a lot of complexity towards process management in general, is nestability. I specifically looked up the word, there was just a short description. A process can be a sub-process, or can be composed of sub-process, or can be a sub-process in itself. What does that mean? Well, I could talk about my daily routine in the morning as a process. It's happening again and again. It's kind of standardized. I'm starting in the bed, and the end of the process would be going out the door to work, for example. And within that process, at some part, there is the task of making coffee. And I can just say, okay, making coffee is one part of my morning routine. So there would be a process for morning routine. And one part or one task within that is making coffee. But also, if necessary, I could describe making coffee way more intensely, way more deeply. So I could make a very clear description on how to make coffee, because it still could go wrong. If I don't know how to make coffee and I have to conduct the task making coffee, it will get hard. So if I have so it always depends on the people who are doing the processes, on which level I will write the process or I will describe the process. For me, since I know how my coffee machine works, I will just write make coffee. I will not basically even write that, since I know my morning routine. But if my neighbor is here, or if I have guests over, I will clearly describe the coffee making process, because otherwise it will fail. So the level of description, the level of complexity, how high you are flying in your description is a key element that has to be defined within process management. And also, last thing, there has to be defined process limits. So you have a clear structure. What's the process about? What is it? What is it not? Very importantly. All right. Then one last thing I want to talk about within the first chapter of theory and QM basics is certification, because that's one thing that many JEEs have dealt with, have come around with. And yeah, there is, as I quoted before, like the definitions came from the standard ISO 9000, and that's a family of standardizations of norms. So for everyone, as a very short introduction, if someone doesn't know it, we have the continuous improvement process, and humans also try to follow that pretty well. So everything basically is standardized to some extent. It's, for example, communication. To be able to communicate, now I'm with you, we have standardized communication files, protocols, we have standardized plugs for our mobiles, we have standardized streets, so every car can ride on the street. So there are basically much standards for everything. And so there are also standards for quality management systems. And that is the ISO 9001. And the ISO is the International Standardization Organization, which is global. And so this one is a global standard. And you can get certified by it. So an accredited institution, in Germany it's the TÜV, for example, can come around to your place if you ask him, and then he'll test you if you apply all the requirements to get a certification. And if you do, you then call yourself, okay, I'm ISO 9001 certified institution. And by that, as it says on the left side, you will hopefully have multiple benefits, such as an efficiency booster, because you really deal with your quality management, as that is the intent what the quality management norm is about. It often helps with market entries, especially in the automotive industry. It's basically impossible to be part of if you're not certified, because if a company like Audi or Porsche are looking for a new supplier of something, they will just make a public announcement, and if you go there and apply to become a part of their supply chain, they will ask you, okay, are you certified? Do you have the necessary certification so we can trust you, basically, that you have a great organization and not everything will fall apart tomorrow. So you have structure, you have stability. And so a certification can help within market entry, because if you don't have it, you won't be part of that industry. Also, it's kind of an image thing, and that's something where JEEs can make use of. Again, also the sales argument. You can provide it to a client and say, hey, you see, we are certified, so there is structure within us. We are a great organization, basically, which is the last point, credibility. And in my opinion, credibility is one of the most things that JEEs struggle with, because you get a sense that, oh, you're just students, you cannot help me, you're not professional enough. But with a certification like that, that can be used as leverage to say, hey, you see, we are certified, that we have a structure, that we have a quality management system, that we are professional. There are JEEs that do have such a certification. I listed a few of them from different countries. CCT is also one in Germany, in Berlin. Then there is one from Paris, and then there's one from Italy, from Milan, where I'm currently doing my exchange. So I'm happy to have some people from Jamie here as well. And as well from my JEE, I hope. I also spread the word around, but we'll see. On the other hand, they've heard me multiple times, so maybe they're not interested anymore. All right, so why should I do that? On the left side, you see the obvious things that one can be promised. What are the downsides? Well, those things aren't so cheap. There's an inspector coming, an auditor, and will test you basically, and he will not just test you once, but he will test you every year. So you have to get your certification on year 1, then on year 2 and 3 you have to get recertification, a small one, and in year 3 you have to do the whole process again. And at least within Germany, I can give you some numbers. It's about 3,000 euros to have an initial certification. And also, of course, you have to get yourself into shape to pass the certification and have a good structured organization towards the guidelines. We in our JEE don't have that, but I would say for all the quality management guys listening, that's some literature that I really can recommend. Normally, you can get it for free with your university on some way. And there's also lots of literature about it, but it's very interesting to read it. And to me, it's still a very amazing document. Since I stated before, the hairdresser can get certified towards ISO 9001. A student enterprise can get certified towards ISO 9001. And Volkswagen itself or other huge companies are certified towards that standard. So it's one standard which is suitable for basically every venture there is. And to write a text and to write down requirements, as it states in 9001, that are able to be fulfilled by a hairdresser as well as a huge automotive company is pretty amazing. And makes it tough to read, but I really would recommend to just jump into it. All right. So that's it for the first theory part. And now I want to look with you more closer in quality management for junior enterprises. And I'm starting with something special from Germany, which is our umbrella organization, our national organization, the BDSU. Well, they've come up with something very special, and I don't know if any other country within JEE Europe has the same concept, basically. Many of you know, if you ever dealt with the international organizations, that Germany has 2 umbrella organizations. And the thing I'm talking about now is one of the main things why that is so. So why that's the case. The main difference basically between those 2 organizations and why one split it from the other and formed its own is that the BDSU is conducting a yearly audit on every member of its network. So there are 32 or 30 something members within the BDSU for the 2 JEEs. And yeah, there is the mandatory yearly audit. And what's happening basically is that it's get announced, and then you have some time to file in all the documents of last year, all your projects, all your documentation, or specific documentation, your new members, a list of members, and lots of stuff. You send all that to the BDSU. They're starting to check it, and then there will be a date where 2 auditors come by, and then they will test everything, basically. So they will hold an audit. And what will be audited is written in the national guideline, which is available for everyone. Yeah, thank you. The other organization is JC Network. Beside the BDSU, it's about the same size, pretty much. So there has been a rally on which is the better one, but I think they're just maybe a little bit different. But I wouldn't scale it or put it on the same scale. and they both strive for a common goal, so I think they should be more united than diverted. Okay, back to the audit. Yeah, I wrote down some pros and cons. It's always a debate because it's kind of a lot of effort. But in my perspective, as I've been now with a JEEs a little bit longer, and I'm also being active as an auditor myself and visited multiple JEEs and basically testing their internal organization, it really, really helps within Germany to set a common ground between the JEEs. So since there is a framework which everybody has to comply, it really helps to have a comparable structure within those JEEs. It also really improves long-term sustainability. One thing about JEEs, and I think that applies to all the JEEs in whole Europe, even globally, is they change very rapidly. So there is fluctuation in normal companies. One does not stay too long. McKinsey, it's 3 years, for example. The small SMEs, it's maybe 30 years, so you come there and stay there for your whole life. But within JEEs, it's typically only 2 years, or at least in Germany, or even faster. There are JEEs which change every semester. And yeah, I think the main task or the main challenge for JEEs is to be able to really implement something like continuous improvement, where you can really cycle upwards your quality. Yeah, just because of the fluctuation. How will you keep the knowledge within the JEE? And that's what I want to talk about today, and think that's one of the most challenging things that a JEE has to deal with. And the audit, in my view, gives sustainability, as it is a third-party organization, which is also very sustainable and not so fluctuating. So the quality management audit has been there for multiple years, and it's stayed the same for multiple years, pretty much. There are some changes, but it gives a framework, and it continues to have this framework. So our JEE won't be completely different because there's a new board, and they just want to do everything different. They have lots of freedoms to do stuff different, but they mustn't do anything different, which is mandatory to pass the audit, basically, because we would fail if we change those stuffs very rapidly. Also, next point is best practice sharing. As I've been an auditor myself, conducting, I think, 12 audits or something, so I visited 12 different JEEs, and I've seen very deeply into each of their processes, each of their files, how do they do project documentation, how they do teaching, and I was able to connect some JEEs and also gain some best practices for myself, which we then implemented in our JEE. So it's a tool for sharing, basically, to get very deep insight, which is not happening on our national events. I think the national events are very great for networking and having a beer together, but for our audit, where you just very deeply dive into all the documents, gives very different insight, basically. And also, last point, which I added today because I really thought it's relevant to mention, is that the audit really gives a sense to have a quality management department. And I think each JEE within the BDSU has one, and their task is at least to manage the BDSU quality requirements. But there is one. And I'm not sure if every JEE would have a dedicated quality management department if there wouldn't be something like a BDSU audit. And of course, there are also some downsides, which I don't want to not mention. Of course, it prevents diversity, as it gives a framework. It always is a balance and comes with two sides. So on the one hand, we have structure, but on the other hand, we have structure. So we cannot develop freely and change rapidly and do completely different stuff. Also, it's kind of a lot of effort for JEE. So there is basically the whole QM department dealing with it. When there is the audit, it's a pretty busy season for that department, and they really have to struggle to be inside. Also, if you fail, you might get thrown out of the BDSU. It's then the voting. You have to apologize before everyone, so there is kind of a big thing behind that. And also, of course, on the other side, it's a big effort for the BDSU itself. Also a main cost factor where a person has to drive to every GEs, where you have to organize the audit pool, and so you could skip all that basically. And last thing also, as I said before, quality management, as we now talked about, has a gigantic scope basically, and it could do so much, and you can apply it on basically every interaction there is. But mostly, since that is the clearest requirement and the clearest statement thing that you have for the GE, the quality management of the GEs in the BDSU mostly tend towards fulfilling the BDSU requirements, and it kind of also limits the box basically you are thinking in. So that's the quality management that there is, and there isn't much more basically. I hope that point was made clear. So one more slide for the yearly audit. What are the elements? What is tested basically? And the third thing that is tested is education. So how do you educate your members? And that's made by having a list what has to be inside of, or what has to be taught to members, and did the members participate? Oh, geez. Arthur is asking a question if all GEs are certified by the BDSU, or is it just the internal standards of the BDSU? All the members of the BDSU, so all the 30-something members, are certified. Otherwise, you cannot be a member of the BDSU. So if you are a GE, you don't have to be in the umbrella organization directly. Also, you can be in the other umbrella organization, the JC network, as we said before. But if you want to join the BDSU, then you have to have your first audit, basically. And there you have to fulfill the requirements. You have to pass that audit. And then you can be a member. And afterwards, it will be done yearly. And if you fail, then it's on debate if you can stay within the BDSU or if you have to leave. There's another question. Does the BDSU provide trainings for the GEs to establish QM within the GE? Yes, they do. Normally there is, like for us, for example, BCPro is in the BDSU since 15 years or something. So we have a tradition of having the quality management. And on the other side, something as I'm doing now here. So I'm conducting a training on quality management in the name of GE Europe. There's also a BDSU trainer academy where there are trainers, where I am a trainer in since I'm a European trainer. I'm also a trainer in BDSU. And if you ask the BDSU that you want to be trained and have a training, then you're getting one, basically. And also something like this here is very much a part of that. Also, if you are a GE that has previously not been within the BDSU, then there is a very huge onboarding process which normally lasts 1 or 2 years, where they really develop with you together. You have like sparring partners, so like GEs which are within the BDSU for longer and have lots of back practice sharing. So to get up to the start on the level of the BDSU, there is lots of help. And within this system, if you really want to improve, there's also trainings like this one I'm conducting. Also, the BDSU itself has a board and members, and there's also a quality management department, which you can always ask. Okay. Elements of the annual audit. We scoped the third thing, it's education. So you have to have some elements of teaching. So you basically have to teach you. So again, like standards are formed, some requirement is you have to teach your members about presentation skills. There's nothing said about how you do that, or if you do it by practice or by slides or by text or whatever. It just says you have to teach your members about presentation skills. And then within the audit, you say, hey, here I'm having this presentation teaching where everyone is filmed, and then they see themselves and we reflect on that, and then there is feedback. And then the auditors say, okay, perfect. I think that helps to teach them how to present themselves. and then that point is fulfilled. But all the points as within the ISO 9001, like the global standard, which the BDSU tries to a little bit rely on in some sense, it's very broadly, and there's no specific you have to do such and such. It's more like you have to take care that it is taught, but not how you do it. Next thing that is tested is the projects, and there you have to give the number of projects you conducted, and then a sample is derived. So if you did 20 projects, 4 projects are tested. If you do 50 projects, 6 projects are tested, or some else number. So it's always just a portion, because it otherwise would be just way too much effort. And within project, internal and external project are tested if they are documented correctly, basically. So the aim is that the team conducts a project, and then they do a project documentation. I think that's pretty common around Europe. And that project documentation is then on the one side stored for later. So if there is again a market analysis on whatever, then you can look up previous market analysis, how they did it. And yeah, you can from there develop your own methods and have that as a common ground. And to have those correct documentations, and correct documentations is also part of the audit. Next thing that is tested if there is a continuous improvement process in place and used. We'll come to that later. Also, we already talked about continuous improvement as being the fundamental cycle upwards to increase quality over time. Leadership is tested, so is the board evaluated? That's relevant. And again, there the key thing is, for example, has there been an evaluation of the board in the last semester? Or there has to be an evaluation of the board. That's the requirement. It's not said how you evaluate it. It's just best practice that you send around the forums where you can rate the board members and give feedback. But that's best practice. It's not mandatory to do it in that way. It's just mandatory that you deal with leadership and that you deal with evaluation. It's also mandatory to have to ask all participants once a semester how they're doing. So are they happy within the JEE? How is motivation within the JEE, and is everything working? And the requirement is you have to ask your members once a semester if they are happy, basically. But there is never a word about how you do that. And within that boundary, within that framework, you are free to choose. And last thing, which is reviewed specifically, and that's why I would say most BDSU GEs are very proficient with process management, is processes. And there again, it's mandatory to have specific processes. For example, there has to be a process in place how members are getting into the GE. There has to be a process in place how members are educated. And there has to be a process in place how projects are done. It's still up to the GE how they do projects and how do they take up their members, but it's mandatory to have it documented some way. And by that, it's ensured that there is a constant quality over time, since that process has been there 10 years ago and will be there as long as the audit lasts. All right. There was some question. I'll just look it up. Does the BDSU provide trainings? We had that. Carolina is asking, do the GEs have to pay for the audit certification, and are there any difference for the real ISO certification? No, the audit doesn't cost anything, which is basically, it's a service, or kind of a service from the umbrella organization. On the other hand, the umbrella organization is financed by the individual members. So there is it not directly costs money, but in the end, since everything that the BDSU is spending is coming from the GEs somehow or from some sponsorship, it of course is a service which goes in circle. But the yearly costs, it's basically the costs are to drive to the GE. So it's maybe 100 euros or something. or in expensive cases, maybe 200. And normally the auditors then just sleep somewhere, and normally it's a couch of one member because that's the easiest way. And difference to the real ISO certification, of course, there are, since the BDSU audit maybe lasts 4 hours, I think, in a good case, maybe 8 in a bad case. And it doesn't look on such many fields as the ISO certification does. The ISO itself is very well structured, again, towards, for example, leadership, process measurement, KPIs, which is a part which isn't required within the BDSU standard or BDSU certification. Still, as we had before, some slides back here, within ISO certification, it's always kind of a marketing argument to say, hey, we are certified, we have certified quality, and the JEEs of BDSU use the BDSU certification to always say that. But as with all certifications, basically, you have to trust them. And if you don't trust that the BDSU certificate is worth anything, and if you don't trust that the ISO certification isn't worth anything, then, well, it just isn't. So certification, the value of a certification is very much up to the receiver or to the client in the end who looks at it. I could write you a very nice certification that you now are a quality expert because you listened here in my little talk, but if the recruiter in the end really doesn't care about Vinzenz Abt, then, well, that won't help you so much. So it always depends, of course. Okay. One thing for the continuing slides, if you see the BCPro logo up here, so that's my JEE in Berlin, then that's basically best practice from our JEE. The other slides didn't have that so much because it was just common knowledge, but everything where that logo is up of ours, I'm talking specifically how we at BCPro are doing it. And it doesn't mean that that's the best way in any way, in any means. It just tells you our perspective on things and how we do it. But I really like, during my time as an auditor and doing my national events, I think just sharing the knowledge is basically the best thing to get the insights of how the others do it, and you just grab the pieces that you like the most and implement them yourself. So I hope to give you here the relevant insights to be able to improve your own JEEs. So how does our QM department work? There are dedicated tasks, and then there are like people which deal with that task. So one can be the responsible person for key performance indicators, for examples. And yeah, like that it works with any of those given. So there is a team on knowledge management, and there in gray is given like the main tasks. I just translated it from German from our quality management training, and I hope it's sufficient that you can understand it. Knowledge management, pretty clear. They care about our wiki, which I present you also. Then there is key performance indicators, which try to measure what we achieve, which try to measure our performance, how happy are the people. For example, again, the BDSU says once in a semester you have to evaluate your board, and you have to ask the people if they are happy. So key performance indicators is, okay, how can we measure that basically? How do we do that? Which numbers will help? Then there's continuous improvement. We've talked about it a lot. I also show you how we'll do it, or how we are doing it. Then there's project documentation. I think that's also a thing that basically every JEE has, since most JEEs have some kind of project documentation for the conducted projects. And that's a feedback person basically who checks again before it's going to the archive for the other members if everything is correct and if it will pass the audit and if it has the required quality. And then newly formed, there is a team which is dealing with the project controller, which is a dedicated person in each team. So each project that is done has a dedicated project controller. I've seen that also with another JEs. The project controller is not really part of the team, so he doesn't do operative work. He's more an advisor. He's oftentimes a senior member, and that team shall, as it says, strengthen the role and really define what are the things that the PC, the project controller, is doing. And now I'll show you how we're doing it. Those screenshots are in German, but I always translated the most relevant things, and I'll just talk about basically. So IT infrastructure, basically. I think IT infrastructure is a key topic also for any JE, basically. And yeah, we are using Microsoft as a JE. And why we're doing that? Because, well, we've always been doing it. When I joined, we've already used it. And so I have no clue why we're using it. It just has been there already. And like most IT systems, it just historically grew, there is a saying in Germany. Now, currently, I'm also part of a JEE in Milan, as I'm doing my exchange there, and they are using Google as a platform. So Google Drive, Google Mail, which is different, which is a lot different in my view. But yeah, also historically grown, and they work differently. We are using SharePoint by Microsoft, and yeah, also basically we are trying to use the Microsoft universe as good as it goes to have as little breaks within IT flow and data flow as possible. I will elaborate on that a little more later. And when you are within our SharePoint, then there's basically that interface as a starting page. And I will go into deep dive on some of those point mentions, and some I'll just talk about now. So the wiki will deep dive on that. Then there is storage and templates. Storage is basically document storage. All the documents that are produced, all the documents that are held, that are given, all the projects that have been done are stored there. So it has a structure below it with just common folders, and then you can navigate through that and basically find all the information that you should need. Then the next folder is templates. So if I want to create anything, starting from an invoice to a client, over a new project, over the presentation for the next team event or team session, which we have every week, then there is the thing for templates. Then there is an organizational chart, which just shows who is involved and which person had which role. Then there is the continuous improvement. We'll also look at that closer in a few minutes. And there's also processes, which we do an even larger deep dive on. So continuous improvement. This is also in German, but I will just want to explain to you how the general concept that we're doing. And also on the bottom, I listed some tools one could use for that. So for internal communication, we are using Microsoft Teams, which has come up over the last 3 years, I would say. And yeah, it really changed our JE and helped us a lot in becoming more decentralized, to have basically no email communication within the JE and have a really clear communication, direct communication with little break, little delay. It has an app on your mobile. It's available online. It's part of the Microsoft Office 365 in Universe, basically. And also a general thing for the Microsoft part, it's free for JEs normally. So you can apply for Microsoft since you're an educational institution, and you should get everything for free, basically. That should work out. And yeah, our continuous improvement, we really much, we before had a continuous improvement, which was part of the SharePoint. So you clicked somewhere here, and then you came on an extra site where you could list something, basically, just like an Excel. No one used it because it was too far away. Like daily communication was happening within Microsoft Teams, and no one would specifically go online to the SharePoint, click on that, and then fill out an Excel file to use it. So in terms of quality, the quality of our continuous improvement process wasn't very high because it was unpractical. Like one requirement of the customer, of the JEE member, is to reach it very easily. And we didn't fulfill that requirement very well. So our quality of our continuous improvement process or tool wasn't very good. So we changed that. We implemented directly, basically, within our daily tool of communication, which is Teams, Microsoft Teams. And there you have different channels. And one channel now is called Continuous Improvement Board. And within that, there is basically a Kanban board. And I think you are familiar with Kanban boards where you have different buckets and different lanes and can fill in tasks. And then, throw those tasks around. It's common from Agile project management. And yeah. There has been another question on processes, which I will just shortly answer. Certification, are all processes certified, or is it just those for the audits? Only the audit. So within the BDSU, it states that you have to have processes which regulate that and that and that, and only those ones are tested. If you and your JEE decide to have more than the necessary processes, those are not tested. And also, that's always a very big discussion, that topic. Shall we do more than necessary? Because it's always effort, you have to care about it. It also has to look nice. It has to fit to the rest. So how much quality management do I do is one of the major questions everyone has to deal with. To which extent I want to do that practice. Okay, now a question on what continuous improvement. As I stated, we're using Microsoft Teams. And within Microsoft Teams, it's Microsoft Planner, I think, which is providing the board function. And then there is a Google Forms, Microsoft Sheet, I think it's called, where you can then fill out a new idea. And then that idea will get evaluated by the board. And if it's a great idea, then it will get implemented. There's a responsible sign. There is a date set. And then by that, you have like all the small ideas from the whole JEE, which will improve continuously your JEE practice. There is a question about the tools. As I stated, like we use Microsoft Planner, which is part of Microsoft, or which is integrated in Microsoft Teams. There are other tools like Trello, Slack, or Asana. All of the mentioned ones should be free to some extent, or have a free version, which is normally enough for a JEE. We, before Microsoft Teams, used Asana, which is basically also a Kanban board with different buckets and lanes. Do I recommend tools apart from that? Well, I would say you can basically use every tool, and I neither know Airtable nor Notion. Therefore, I didn't list them, but that is no inclusive line, so feel free to try everything there is regarding different buckets, and just be very careful. As I stated before, our problem with our old continuous improvement process was that people didn't use it because there was a break in their daily activity to go on the SharePoint specifically, and specifically within the narrow way to navigating towards the continuous improvement process. And so please, whatever you choose to take, if you're thinking of implementing such a thing, so an idea box basically, do it in a very, very convenient way, because otherwise there is the risk that no one will use it. That's basically where we stand. Okay, then next thing I'll talk about the wiki, and since I didn't ask anyone if I can use the picture, I just blanked them out. So that's the entrance page. It says a heartily welcome to the wiki, and then there is down there a description. What is the wiki? What's the difference to just the folder structure? So why is it there? And here on the left side, so we are again within the SharePoint environment, is all the different articles that are there. And I'll just go down from top to bottom real quick. So there is general stuff like vision and core values, history, corporations, continuous improvement, abbreviations, lexica, events, dress code, recruiting, assessment center, work end. And then there is departments. So how is our structure? How is the board? Who is IT? What is sales? What is marketing? What is quality management? What is human resources? And then there's also the processes, which we will get to later. Here are some example sites, how they look like. It's basically a wiki, like Wikipedia, for example. Everyone can edit it. And well, I don't think that many people edit it. It's always a big initiative. Like we have to redo some parts again. Some parts are getting old, so please take care. And quality deals, I would say, like they're the dedicated persons dealing with knowledge management, and they take care of the wiki. And if they think, hey, the chapter on human resources is getting very old and just stuff is standing there which isn't right, then they write the head of human resources, hey, please look at your article. Can you maybe redo it or improve it somehow? And yeah, it's kind of intuitive. It's a wiki. It works well. There are various different tools for wikis again. As I cannot strengthen enough, we really try to have as little breaks within our IT infrastructure as possible. Therefore, we chose SharePoint. But you can as well choose Confluence, for example, which is within Wiki for itself a way better wiki. You can also build your own Wikipedia, basically, which looks exactly the same like Wikipedia, also open source, as far as I know. And there are other free wikis out there. All right. Next slide is, wiki engagement. As I said, everyone can build with the wiki, and we really tried that everyone really can, not just from the technical side, so they are allowed to edit the sites, but they also know how to do it. And so we especially prepared a site which is how to wiki, and it describes how to generate a new site, how to edit a page, how to integrate videos and links and everything. And we even did some short recordings of how to really do it. So also, if the person who set up the wiki a year ago will leave the JEE, we are still able to do it. Because that's basically also one of the big pain points which I learned over the few years. To really sustainably implement a new IT tool is very, very hard, especially when it's a complex one. If you implement it and then leave, and there is no one else able to use it, it will be dead in like a week. And so with such measurements, we think the wiki is part of our continuous improvement. It really helps us to have a central platform for knowledge where it's compactly displayed. And we really want to have that sustainably and not to break down again and then we'll fall down in quality. So we want to keep spinning up in quality, and that page, how to wiki, is a very practical thing on how we want to do that. How we want to really be able to use it continuously. So to get the wiki as a standard, as a template to be improved further and further and not die basically. Okay, we'll get there in a second. I want to jump back one slide. The thing you can see here is a business process, and we'll now start talking about processes intensively. And I don't know if anyone else beside the BDSU GEs have seen something like that so far. There are studies, like you can study it in the meantime. And we'll now jump into process management as stated before. So how does process management look like in a GE? Yeah, I'll jump back to slide 5 or something really quick to give you again that picture. So as stated before, from the very, very general perspective, this graph describes all companies there are. So a company has some kind of customer with some kind of requirements, then they do some kind of stuff, some kind of management processes help them doing it, and some kind of support processes. I'm very sorry for a second. And some kind of support processes help doing those. Then again, you deliver your whatever product to the customer and hope that you have value added. And now we look how we adapted that concept towards the GE. All right. That's how it looks like for our GE basically. So we have the processes of the board, which is in our case finance, regulations and compliance, networking, and strategy. And then we have 2 main processes. So what our GE is doing, well, we are doing projects and we develop our members, which are interlinked, but nevertheless can be separated pretty clearly. And then we have all the kinds of support processes, which are the support processes of any kind of company. We have marketing and relations, we have member administration, we have quality management, we have information technology. So pretty much the same as anybody at any other company, and probably pretty much the same as your GE is having. I would say that framework, maybe some board processes can be different, but I would say the main processes are always the same in each GE, because that's what defines the GE movement. It's the entrepreneurial spirit, and it's the development of its members. And the second thing is the support process, which I think is also pretty much the same in any GE. On the right side, you can again see tools. You draw those processes basically. And we use Signavio, which is a Berlin-based company. But there are others like Adonis, which is free, and Bisagi, which is also free. The BDSU has a collaboration with Signavio, so we have free licenses for that. If one would ask very kindly, one would probably get some more, I guess. But if not, there are alternatives available, as stated there. And yeah, for the interface, that's now the example with Signavio, but they all look pretty much the same. So you have a blank space in the middle, and then on the left side you have your different elements, such as a task or as a starting point. And with that, you basically draw the processes. And in the end, they look like that. That's basically the process of my GE if you want to become a member. So they have a structure. That's a standard. It's called BPMN 2.0. It's Business Process Modeling Notation. And yeah, it always looks the same. Pretty much again for the same reasons. Everyone can read it. So if I interchange that, if I show that to the auditor of the BDSU, since they are used to BPMN 2.0, it's very easy to get what is standing there. And it has a very specific style, which is not too complicated. And I here with the red arrows described the main things that are within the process. So basically it starts somehow, and I will just translate it real quick for you. It says that the person which applied went through the assessment center. So the process before is the assessment center process. And when he then successfully went through the assessment center, he will become a part of the JEE. And the first task that is happening says to implement your email account. So you'll get an email from the IT department, and you then have to follow the instruction in there, so your email will be set up accordingly. Next task is that you have to play the onboarding game. With your first email account, you also get a bunch of emails that you have to do such and such to get your signature, to read through a few emails, to look at a few documents. So the next thing you have to do is do all that. If you achieve that, and here we have the first symbol, it's a parallel gateway, which says you have to follow all of the paths which are coming out of that. You have to do the following things. You have to take part in the mandatory teaching. You have to be part of the JEE. You have to conduct an internal project. You have to conduct your specific trainee project. And you have to fill out or you have to document everything on a list, which is given to the trainee specifically. If you did all that, all the sequence flows come together again, and it only continues the process if everything came together. So if everything of the above mentioned things are done, then he can send in his approval list, and then it switches. So we first have here the trainee, which is dealing with the topic, and then it switches towards the board, and the board receives it. Here's another sequence flow coming down, so there is an exclusive gateway, and then the board continues to deal with this application. So you see a lot of information within such a process chart, and one very crucial thing is responsibilities. So by having the different pools and different lanes, you see, okay, I am a trainee, so I have to do everything of that. Okay, I am the board member, so I will get something from the trainee, and then I have to do that and that. If I don't get anything, okay, then he probably is doing his stuff still. And so you get a very structured and very visual thing of what is happening, what has to happen in parallel. You can also build in questions and then go left and right depending on the answer. And yeah, you can pretty much visualize everything that's happening within a JEE or with any other corporation with such processes. The other thing that's happening over here is that there is a questionnaire coming in that someone wants to be a member, but he is already a member in another JEE. And that's a thing that's mandatory to have it in your, so it's mandatory from the BDSU audit to have a process to take members into your JEE. And within that process, it is mandatory to deal with the question, what happens when a member of another JEE applies in your JEE? And that's basically what we did here. And we even had the cases a couple of times. So it's a member of another JEE is asking to be part of our JEE, and then it's going directly to the board, and the board has to basically think about that application and then have to decide whether or not they want to take them in. That's the highest level you can draw it. As you see it, it just says well tested. And we currently have the situation, and there have been questions coming up. Okay, but how do I test it? And what's the case with their senior level? So we have an internal level of junior and senior and managing consultants. And how do we deal with the level of experience when someone is coming from another JEE? Well, that process here doesn't help. It's not narrow enough. It just says tested, but I don't know how to test it. As I stated in my generic example before, like doing coffee, here we have the same thing. It's just, okay, test it. And now we have the real case. We have a real case. and our board says, hey, that doesn't help me. I don't know how to deal with the coffee machine if it just says brew coffee. I have to have, okay, press the start point on the left. So we'll continue to improve this process, and probably we'll add a few more tasks there in that sequence flow to really define how it will be done in the future. And since it then is documented how it's done, when another case comes up, we can clearly say, okay, that's how we do it in our practice, and therefore we can continue working like that. So we then continuously improved our process and how we in our JEE deal with it. So it's again defining a standard. All right. Yeah, that slide isn't too pretty. I apologize. It was a quick one because I wanted to say something about quality management in projects, and it's very generic, and I just will talk about it a little bit. So within our JEE, and I would say within the German JEEs, that's a little bit specific, there is a very sharp distinction between a project team, which is doing the project, and the JEE itself. If a client wants to do a project with a JEE, he's asking the JEE. And okay, there's one more question on processes, which will do real quick. Do you have written texts behind the points individualization? So with the text, every point in the diagram is described. Yes, we do. Most times. So if there has to be more information, then there is more information given. Also, a thing is like the visualization with the comments, which is giving you more insight into what's happening here. So here it says you have to do the mandatory teaching, and the mandatory teachings are listed here to describe it further. One more thing is one could draw a sub-process, which is basically looking like this process, but we could make it like part here. And again, to show you that one, here you have those small pluses, and you can click on those, which says you can jump inside. And that's what is mean with processes and sub-processes. So within quality management, stuff is happening. And also we could use that here within tested. We could make a sub-process, which is then really closely, really narrowly describing tested on a lower level. And also you can author set write text in the background here, and then if you click on it, the text shows up. That we are also having those visual comments has to do with the implementation of processes in our wiki. Since they are pasted in, there is a picture. Basically, you cannot click on them. And so we chose to visualize it via those comment fields. Okay, again to team structure or to projects. So we have our JEE, and if the client asks a JEE to conduct a project, then the project, is a team is found to do the project, and if the team is there, then the team talks with the client, and the JEE is pretty much out of scope. And if they are doing the project with the client together, in the end, they are giving an evaluation form to the client, and the evaluation is going back to the JEE. Carolina asks if the team does include an account manager. Yes, it does. So the team is responsible for invoicing and all the financials of it. That's not part of the JEE. The JEE in the end is invoicing the team. So the team is very an entity of its own. So all the cash flow is, and all the responsibilities are between the team and the client. Yeah. So within for the JEE, of course, the team is part of the JEE, but the members are developed by training. And also, like we said before, there's the project controller, which is not really part of the project team, but he's more a feedback person who is also telling back to the JEE and to the board and to the salespeople how the persons are doing. So there's kind of a controlling via the project controller. Then in the end, there is a controlling of the client and the team. So if something went very wrong, the client will tell the JEE, hey, you sent me a horrible team and I won't do business with you again, which is very bad for the GE, of course. And yeah, therefore we have also a controlling instrument in place. And in the end, of course, the team gives back knowledge towards the GE, as they are part of the GE, but as well as quality assured project documentation tested by the dedicated team of the quality management within the GE. And therefore, the GE itself can strive. So the team is something which is only happening for a short period of time, but the essential knowledge is given back to the GE, and so this GE can like spiral upwards within a continuous improvement. If you have specific questions regarding quality management and projects, you can feel free to post questions. Also, I put here the BDSU logo because it's pretty much the same. That's generic here is pretty much the same within the whole BDSU, since some parts are also mandatory within the audit. All right. And now there is some part, I hope I inspired you to do like process management and to get you really set up that you want to improve quality within your GE and doing that in a systematic way. And so I want to talk a little bit about projects and what projects you can do within your GE to improve quality, and also then what kind of quality project GEs in the past did for clients and what happened there. So we've seen that picture already, and I thought since we defined it as this framework, we can practically use it here again just to recap. So I, as a GE member, just heard this training and thought, okay, it's pretty awesome, and now want to do all of that. And therefore, I want to now improve quality by implementing process management within my GE. And now I want to talk about how that will work out and what are some pitfalls, what are some risks, and what are some best practices maybe. So just conduct it as a regular project, I would recommend. And the third thing is do the planning. So of course you have to really define, as I did before with the example of the coffee machine, really define on which level you want to do this. So you can like make a billion processes, define everything you do, how to open up Outlook basically, to click on every level. But then you get just a lot of documentation, and probably no one wants to read it because they know how to open up Outlook, and so they don't need that process. So really make clear what's your customer and what's your customer abilities and what's your customer is able of and what he's not able of. So which level of processes do you need? If you then define that, you set up a timeline and responsibilities. So probably a team which will do interviews or which will first be searching for a suitable process management software, and then will be the experts and start implementing processes. In the do part, you will then visualize all the processes within interview setting, for example, or with just the knowledge. Typically, it's done with interviews because it's really important that there's not like the quality management team or project team, which is just saying, hey, that's how you have to do it. The concept really matches, and I cannot emphasize this enough because that's basically why it fails so often. It's not like saying someone how to do his job. It's more like asking him how he does his job. So really switching tables. You are just really a service provider who is speaking the language of processes. Basically, I know how to visualize them, but I have really no clue what you are doing. And I won't tell you what you are doing. Please tell me what you are doing. And I will write it down for you. And then I'll ask you, is that what you are doing? And then you will say, yes, that's what I'm doing. And yeah, it's crucial to get this approval by the persons who is actually doing it. And yeah, that's basically one of the main pitfalls within operations. that you're not on the level of the people who are actually doing it. You maybe talk with the boss or with the boss of the boss, and he's saying, yeah, that's how we're doing it. And then you ask the actual people and say, no, we never did it like that. And so that step here is really, really crucial. And it all starts within the planning phase, like which are the persons I'm going to talk to, how I'm going to do that, on how level will I go. And in the end, will someone say, okay, this is my process, this is how I'm doing it? To get that level of commitment is like the toughest thing, I would say. That in the end, they don't say, hey, whatever you're writing down, I don't care. And then you start doing it yourself. And then they say, okay, you did it, it's not mine. And so they will just not follow the process that just defined. And then you just wasted a lot of time and normally a lot of money as well. Then in the check phase, well, you now implemented your processes and you visualized them very nicely. You can then check if they're really being followed. So I would suggest that someone in the QM department does that, which is kind of affine to processes. And he will just, for example, in your survey that you're having every month or every year or every semester, you ask, hey, how well do you know the processes? Can you name them? Do you know which process is important? Or how often are they looked at? Or when was the last process refined and improved? Or did never anybody look at them? So that's also basically the main challenge to being able to evaluate your success. And really depending on your results, so I would suggest to do that in a very structured approach. You like increase or decrease the scope. Do we want to do more more processes? Do we want to do less? Do we have to change the interface? Do we have to change the layout? Don't they reach it because it's too far away? Like before with the continuous improvement example. Is some change necessary? And even if it's just minor, you then kind of restart the plan, do, check, act cycle again. And within setting it and within documentation, you ending up into a continuous improvement cycle. To give also like a practical example on how to understand continuous improvement and PDCA. And yeah, now there is, I think, the last slide. Those are projects for JEEs. Regarding quality and process management, mainly process management. As I told you, the BCPro is very proficient and does lots of them. And I was part in some of them and I got insight in some of them. And therefore, I can just describe a little bit for the salesperson, which are hopefully listening as well. So on the very left side, as we said, many people or many companies are getting certified regarding ISO 9001. And yeah, within their certification, they're normally lost because they never dealt with quality management in such a way and in such a structured way. And it's very weird to read the standard for the first time and to then try to apply it. And that can be very nicely done as a project. So if someone wants to get an ISO 9001 certification, a JEE can support them by giving them structures, by conducting interviews. They especially see the role of a consultant, where it is like, I'm just a consultant. I don't know how you're doing your job, you person which is working there for 30 years now. I have no clue, honestly. Please tell it to me so I can draw the process. And yeah, I have no clue. And that's basically a very good role of a consultant for process management, because if your interviewer is someone who says, okay, you do it like that, right? And then we do this, and then we do that. And the other person will then not really engage with that process if it's just dictated like that. Then we once did a call center workload analysis, where we used processes in a kind of different way. We use it more basically as a tool for business intelligence and analytics. We had a startup which was very fastly growing. They had a call center, And since everything is growing, the call center had to grow as well. And then they just were appeared in different tasks and no one really knew what they were doing. And sometimes they were very stressed and it was horrible, much workload. And sometimes it was very low rates, very low workload, and they were not so busy. And they want to structure that and really get an overview on that. And so we did interviews with the call center persons and we wrote everything they did down in processes. And after we built such pictures as you've seen before, we then put numbers to those pictures. So for example, making coffee takes 5 minutes. Okay. Then, and in that example, of course, we had calling the customer for an invoice problem takes 20 minutes. Okay. In 5% of the times, the customer did reply on the first try, so the process was done. In 95% of the times, the customer didn't reply, so we waited 2 weeks and then called again, which took another 5 minutes. And so we built a very, very structured approach, and then we put behind that very structured approach some times and some percentages of occurrence. And by that, we could calculate the average time a process was taking. Then we verified our simulation, basically, our process model of the real life, by just basically sitting next to the persons with a timer and did some timekeeping if it really takes that long. And after we validated that, we gave that model to the head of the call center and said him, okay, this model here describes what your people are doing. And if you now get 1,000 more customers, that will increase your efforts by that amount of numbers, by that amount of hours, basically. And so they use that now as a steering tool, where they say, okay, our salespeople say we will make like a huge sale of, and we will increase customers by 2,000 numbers. Okay, that's cool because we want to grow, but as a result, I need 2.1 more persons within my call center department because, of course, I then have more effort. And they could not quantify that number of effort before, and now they can with our tool. And it's really just based on very structured process management, process visualization, and then putting some numbers and calculations behind it. Then next big chapter, which I want to talk about, is process automation. Each and everyone has heard of Industry 4.0, I guess, and the digital age and digitalization is everywhere, and we are all digital natives, and that's all very superb. And yeah, we'll just wait since the robots take over everything and AI is on the rise and stuff. And I would say, like everything, very, very basically everything has to be well structured before it can be automated. Because machines are dumb, so you have to tell them what they have to do. And yeah, you could never make some kind of robot if you don't tell it exactly what to answer with which response. So you very basically have input, then something happens and you have the output. And you define parameters and you define starting points, and everyone who did software, well, I'm not a software person, so I hope you apologize my very easy way of talking about it. Very generally, you have to define starting variables, you have to define output variables, and then you have a function, which is the process. And if you really did that very nicely, then you can automate it. And for example, the tools I showed you, Bisagi and Signavio, they include that. So, and also they include simulation as we did with the call center. So at the very basic core concept of digitalization, in my opinion, is process management a huge part of, because it's a necessary requirement to have a very structured, clear overview of my inputs and my outputs before I can even think about automating anything. And yeah, for example, if I have a very clear process, for example, customer is calling, okay, he can state his name, he can state his request. That will be done, will be taken up by a call center employee. It will be put into an Excel file. That Excel file will be read by a salesperson. That salesperson will decide whether or not that can be used or fulfill that requirement, and then they'll contact the customer again. Very, very simple. Happens in each GE. But I hope, as I described it, you already kind of saw the process that is happening with the different relevant persons, with the members, with the persons in charge, with the responsibilities. And you really have to have a clear structure in order to be able to automate it. And for example, for the given case, we automate that via Salesforce or via Microsoft Flow, where you have responsible salesperson, which can then decide, okay, yes, we want to do that. Hey, you have a new task which you have to evaluate. Is that something that we can do? And they only have to click yes. And everything else, like writing the emails, everything falls off. And you can just really reduce the mandatory tasks on the decision itself, and not on all the bureaucracy of talking back and forth and of sending files. That all is automated, because it's very clear which structure it is following. All right. Next project one can do as a GE within itself or for others is defining such a project landscape. I showed you the one of BCPro, kind of, which levels are there. I think the high level structure is for everyone the same. And yeah, we did that once for a car dealer who said, okay, I have a new requirement, like I'm an OEM of, I don't know which company it was. Let's take Volkswagen again, because we just said it so many times before. Volkswagen now says, okay, you as a car dealer of mine, you have to have that certification, otherwise you cannot deal my cars anymore. And then the car dealer, well, probably not so happy, says, well, okay, then I'll do it, but I have no clue of process management, and therefore I call a student, Junior Enterprise, which says, okay, we can do process management for you. And then we did interviews with that person, and we even did some part of automation for very simple stuff. And in the end, he really felt the value and saw what that will help. Because there the case was, it's normally not so many people involved. It's like 3 or 4 persons which are running such a car dealership. And the one person who started it is like very senior and experienced, because he set up everything. And then over time, a few new employees came. But he knows everything. And if someone doesn't know something, he's asking him. And so he basically never can go on vacation. And then we again are at knowledge management, and that's a pretty high risk. So if that person, because he is the source of truth, if that person is falling out, if he is getting ill for a longer time or is leaving the company, you're basically screwed, because he takes all the knowledge with himself. And then we are again at the high fluctuation of 4 GEs, where GEs fluctuate in a very rapid manner, where people leave after 1 year, for example. And if they are the smartest ones, then the new software they implemented won't survive. And process management also can help to shift knowledge away from the minds towards a written documentation. Also, the Wiki, which we are having, is fulfilling that task, to really shift knowledge from individuals, from individual minds, which will eventually leave, especially in the case of a GE, where they will leave for sure after a few years, and to shift that knowledge that they gained towards a higher level, basically, which everyone can benefit and read from. And yeah, so afterward we defined the processes, also again with interviews, where we said, hey, we have no clue how you do your stuff, please tell us, we'll write it down for you, and we'll structure it for you, and we'll ask you smart questions about it. Afterwards he said, hey, that's like really, really helpful. He was very skeptical in the beginning and just said, okay, I have to do it because my dealership says so. But afterwards he said, hey, that thing really, really helps me to give it to my employees. So they now don't need me for all the stuff, because they just can look it up, basically. Also, in contrast to the one very popular other thing that you can do is just write everything down in full text. The problem of writing down everything in full text is, well, you can't automate it in any case because there is no technical interface to a PDF file, basically, or at least not in that extent. And yeah, so automation is the one key factor. And I would say also sustainability. And also, again, quality. How easy is it to read? If you have 100 pages describing your JEE, then probably the new member isn't very profound to read those 100 pages. But if you have a process which is going maybe over one screen, that's way more easy to comprehend. And also, it has the advantage that you normally only read your case. So you have yes, no questions in it. And if you, in your case, have a yes, you follow the yes path and you don't have to read everything, the whole book basically, but just the parts that are concerning you. What I have to do and not what everything has to do, because it just cannot be described in a fluent text any other way. Or you just have to jump through the text all the time, but it's also a mess. So their process definition really helped that car dealer to get more oversight and be able to provide information to his employees in a new and other improved way, which we couldn't do before. Also, one thing regarding internationality, which just came to my mind, especially within the Signavio software that we are using, you can define more than one language at a time. So especially for international organizations, and I'm thinking about JEE in Milan, where I'm a part now. They're partially switching to English in some departments, so someone like me, which cannot speak Italian, can be still part of that JEE, which I'm very, very grateful for. If they would have implemented Signavio on a very high level, they would have it once, so define the process once, and then just translate the individual task within it. And then you can either decide if you want to look at it on English or in German. And if you change the process, it changes directly and you don't have the divergence between languages, so you have less documents to care about, and so it breaks down and gets more easy. So something like that is also helpful regarding process management. Another project which we conducted, which is not the most complex one, to be honest, is if a company transfers their business project management software from one to another. They, of course, need help in doing so, because normally they want to do it within no time. So today we are using Bisagi, which I presented before, and tomorrow we are using Signavio. And I want to have all my processes from here to there. Of course, there are standards, and of course, they are kind of comparable, where you can export and import stuff, but it never looks really good. And so they normally take that chance to improve the visualization of their processes as well. And that's more like a layout work and then general improvement work, where you, with a lot of people in a very short time, handle lots of processes for larger companies so they can switch their IT systems pretty fast. And last thing I want to give you as an example for maybe all the JEEs that support their customers with IT software implementation. We just recently had a project where a customer asked us, okay, we want to have something for customer relationship management and for contract management of our suppliers. And yeah, we're doing it somewhere now, but it's horrible. It's very inefficient. Stuff is done double. And it's really a mess. And yeah, they're asking for new software. And what we first are planning to do there is set up the processes that they want to do. And then find the software which fits those processes, those ideal processes, how they want to do it the most. Instead of just searching for some software and then changing the people or changing the company to fit to the software, we really want to describe how the company behaves very well, and then look throughout the different IT systems that are available and find the one that fits perfectly to that customer. And as far as our proposal went, of course, there's now a delay due to coronavirus, but I'm very optimistic that he will be, go with us in the future, because it's a really sustainable argument to give him a long-lasting thing that also has a very high user acceptance, since the users will the first thing define what the processes will look like, and then we'll look for something that fits those processes. All right. I think that was basically the last questions, the last slide. I want to summarize with a short takeaway. We almost have our 2 hours, so that's perfect. And then we can again work with some questions. I think the chat is live, and therefore it has 20 seconds delay, since my video has 20 seconds delay. So I'll give you some time if you want to type something down now. And then we can go deeper, and I can jump back to other slides if you want to. And some main takeaways I want to give you on the way, especially if you have not been in contact with quality management so much and so far. It's really not too abstract, like the things that I described. Hopefully you thought at many points like, okay, that's not so complex and that's obvious. The devil is mostly in the details, but in general one could say like it shares a lot of concepts with quality management, and it's just common sense with a few extra twists. So it's often seen, as I said in my introduction, as something very technical and something very far away with lots of documentation and regulation, and no one likes it. But I hope I made you see some of the human side, since it's always about fulfilling customer needs, and those are normally humans. And so for me it's something very practical instead of something very theoretical and abstract. Second thing, sustainable implementation of new tools and methods is difficult, especially for GEs, I would say, and that's my point I want to make regarding knowledge management, JEE fluctuation, and usability, which I hopefully made clear. Then business process management is a general concept, and that it can help to structure your CE procedures, especially if you, as for example a board member, defined how stuff is done, then you can leave that for the next generation. Then also that process management is at the base of automation, of business intelligence, basically, because if you don't have your defined processes, you don't know what you measure, so you don't know what you simulate, so there is no process mining, there is no dashboards, there is no KPI, there's nothing basically, if you don't know what you're talking about. And to me, business process, especially modulated after the standards, are giving you the bridge between like the human part, the real world, how things are happening, and the IT world, like where you can take your data and throw it around, and can simulate and make assumptions and calculate new findings and synergies. And I think very much very deep down within all the automation discussion we're having right now, and all the more IT systems, the convenient tools, at the ground level, a lot of things have to do with user experience, which is basically quality management, since it has to fit to the user. So quality management and user experience, in my opinion, are pretty much aligned. And because otherwise you just don't know what you should write your software about if you don't know what the process is which lies underneath. And last thing I want to mention here is that it can be a field of consulting for GEs, and we did that very successfully over the last few years, as I myself was part of a few major projects which we did. Also regarding process management and implementing processes where a company switched from everything is written and no one reads it because it's inconvenient and old, and there is no links in between, to a very now process-orientated, digital, interlinked interface with the Signavio software I presented you. And also, yeah, other fields of quality management, as you hopefully got a nice insight in. All right, and now Q&A. So I hope that the delay is not 100 hours. And I see some questions pouring in during the time, and also I will show you the last slide already. There will be a feedback. So that was basically it for the main part. There is a feedback which is going around for email. I prepared all this here voluntary, as you probably know. And yeah, we also, I think JEE for the first time tried out YouTube live streaming. So you can give feedback to that. And I, as a aspiring trainer, of course, will be very happy to hear what you thought of my training, where it could be improved, where I can improve. It was my first webinar. It was my first training with so many people. My voice is getting a little sore, but from that it was very comfy to sit in my chair here and just talk to my laptop. And next to that, of course, you can keep in touch with Junior Enterprises Europe. We are very happy to provide you with some knowledge. And yeah, that was it from my side. And you can, of course, now write down some questions if you want to, or you would just jump out of the presentation and Sarah will have to let me know if many people will leave now and if there are no more questions. So thank you very much, everyone. And now comes awkward silence where I have to look at the chat and there is the delay and I don't know if you're having questions. And you still have to type them. So. Okay, there's something pouring in. Okay. Thank you very much for writing thank you. I would love if you don't do that because I will then miss all the questions and have to scroll back. I hope you all thank me, which is very kind. Yeah, also again, feel free to reach me. I'll just jump back to the first slide. That's my name. I'm on LinkedIn and everything. I also think you have it in the presentation. So if you have any questions, just write me there. And also you now know my JEE, which is BCPro, which name is given somewhere else on the other slides here. There's the quality department of BDSU, which you can ask stuff. And there's also BCPro, where you can ask as well. And maybe the easiest thing is to write me via email, which is vinzenz.abt@bcpro.de, and I'll just, yeah, I think that's obvious. Okay, I'll just click away my presentation and will not do that again, since I think I will mess everything up then. Okay, so for some questions. There was Sarah Entrepreneurs. Here, Arthur Wagner was first. So, do you have a process if something fails, so you can intervene and correct the mistakes? Yes, there typically are. It really depends on what kind of or what case you're talking about. I did a very large project at a financial institution. So a major bank within Berlin, and they switched towards processes, and they implemented at the relevant places key controls, as it calls. If you search for the term key control within risk management, which is also a part which you can very nicely implement within your processes, you just model it. For example, the process which I had here. In some way, this task is a key control, because if and also down here is a key control, because the trainee does all his stuff to become a member, and then the board member will control that. So there we have a control if something went wrong. You could always then describe what happens after that went wrong. So if it went wrong, he will give it back to the person and they have to redo it, for example, to clarify what happens in terms of an escalation. But that's again really depends on how narrow you want to build your processes and is that relevant. It is very relevant if the mistake happens commonly. So I would say if it's just normal, it doesn't have to be a mistake, but it's normal that you can have several outcomes of a process and you have to describe how to deal with each kind of outcome. Can you describe the process of checking quality throughout a contract? Like how did your JEE, like several feedback, several meetings, etc. Specifically on contracts, I would say we work with templates very strongly again. I hope that either your JEE or your national JEE has some kind of cooperation with an attorney or with some kind of lawyers or whatever, and that they can provide you with standardized contracts for your work with your clients. And normally you don't have to change so much from that. So you can just say the project team 1, 2, 3 in the following will be called team, to the client, example client, limited liability company in the following will be called client, agree to such and such contract, and then there is basically the standard contract. So I would recommend contract-wise to really try to implement maybe even different templates for different kind of projects. Maybe if there is a template for market analysis, a template for for process management or for IT implementation, depending on what you are doing most common. It can look a little bit different, I would say, regarding the deliverables and regarding liability. And therefore, I would then switch between different templates. But since most JEE members didn't study law fully, I would not recommend to let the poor JEE members figure it out on themselves each time. That can go wrong. Thanks. Regarding the point of knowledge management, since this is, from my experience, one of the most critical fields of the JEEs, I agree. Did the internal knowledge management, for example, of BCPro grow part by part over time, or was most of the system put in place at once? Well, I would say it's always part by part, because you cannot do it any way else. Of course, you have some kind of status quo and then decide, okay, we switch now. I think each JEE has some kind of knowledge management in place, because otherwise you probably wouldn't exist anymore. And you could decide to switch that knowledge management to a new level, and then you would take the stuff which is there now and switch it towards, for example, a wiki or process management or whatever. Do you plan with potential risk in projects and in the organization? Of course, it depends on every project, but in general. I would say so, that you have to plan with risk. And of course, risk management, you could really make an individual call on risk, or a presentation and training on risk management in general. You can nicely combine process management and risk management, as we said before, with the key controls. So you implement key controls where there is risk. For example, a key control within a process would be a feedback loop of the project controller before there is work going out to the client. So the team, the project team conducted the project. They write their market analysis, for example, as a very nice PowerPoint presentation. And then they send their PowerPoint presentation not to the client directly, but to the project controller, and he will give feedback and maybe improve the market analysis before it goes to the client. And that's some kind of risk management, because you would say, okay, maybe the team didn't do so many market analysis, and therefore we have a senior person looking over them. So you take away the risk, or you block the risk. You have something in place to steer the risk, to lower the risk, that the ugly market analysis doesn't reach the client. And that would be something which you can really neatly act with here, your process-led organization chart, which we had before. For example, you defined your process on a level without the feedback loop. Then you implemented the process. Okay, stuff just goes out to the client, which would be all the do phase, because you plan to do it like that, then you do it like that. And then you check it and you measure and you see, oh no, our client satisfaction is dropping because we don't have a feedback loop. He's always saying, or that's even driven too far. You first would observe that your client is not happy with the quality of output, which is coming from the team. And therefore, there is a failure, there is a lack in quality. And you would jump to the act part where you would think about, okay, why is that? We have to change something. And then you plan, okay, how can we implement feedback loops? Then you implement the feedback loops, and then you check again and see, okay, we don't have those complaints from clients anymore, but we now have the complaint of whatever, or we have now other complaints in the mixture, and the most significant one was regarding the visual quality of the output. That is now gone, so we can now focus on something else. And we implemented it sustainably, since we now have new key controls implemented in our processes to again work with this kind of framework. So I would say, you, as good as you can, you try to plan it, your risks, and avoid them directly. But with the process, it's always important to keep in mind, if you visualize a process, you always build a simplified model. And if the reality is like too far apart, you will also notice it here, because no one will use it, because they say, well, whatever is described in the process is certainly not happening what is in real life. And therefore, you will then have to adapt your processes. So risk is always part. All right, I think I can move that one. There are 42 people watching left. I hope. Okay, now it looks very weird for you. No, it looks again okay for you. That's good. All right. I'll wait for another minute or so if someone is asking other questions. On the other hand, now we are 41 people. Feel very free to ask more questions. And I'm happy to answer them. Also, if it's something very specifically, feel free to write me via LinkedIn or just my email on BCPro. Also, I think Sarah will be happy to direct any questions, which was managing now the invitations and everything. So all mails you got regarding the training was by Sarah. And if you ask something and send it to Sarah, she will probably, I will get it in the end, and we'll be happy to answer it for you as well. All right. Okay, I would say that's enough time. You always have to give the audience enough time to ask something more if it's like slowly coming out of them. Okay, there is something. Good thing I waited. Thank you, Arthur. And in your own opinion, how big should a good QM team be? For example, okay, e.g. for our system. So the question, basically, if I reformulate it, how should you do risk management? How should you design your key controls? And he has given an example, Arthur. This example was to have like two persons looking at something, like to control it with 4 eyes. So that's a very common method, but it's also a very, well, you always need 2 people, so it takes lots of effort and it's very costly normally. So you hope you can do it via a technical solution, but of course it really depends on the thing that you are like controlling in your key control. I would say there is really no general answer to that. It really depends on the problem. If you have something very specific in mind, then feel free to write me and we could discuss which key control, which type of key control might be usable. Okay. As I see myself now in a small mirror since I changed the view a little bit, I think there are 10 to 15 seconds delay. So you should be able to have written another question by now if there are any more. And it doesn't seem so. So all you 39 participants which are still in the stream, I again thank you very much. And we'll end it now. Here is again for the last few seconds to have a look at the contacts if you want to keep in touch with JEE Europe. I really thought it was a great format that they approached during our like forced home time corona crisis thing that we have here trainings, and it's a really great initiative. And yeah, feel free to also approach JEE Europe if you yourself want to do a training. And I can really like recommend it. As I say before, I never did a YouTube stream. I never had an audience of more than 100 people, especially not for training. And therefore, it's just a very great experience. They take really good care of you. They got me a nice intro on how to do it with YouTube Live. And now I feel like well prepared to give another webinars in the future, which I probably wasn't last week. And so it's also giving you improvement for yourself. And of course, I'm very happy and looking forward to your feedback, which you hopefully will fill out for me as a thank you for participating here. And with that, I'll say goodbye and motivate you to also take part within JEE Europe and strengthen the network. As my intro sentence was, maybe as a last very emotional remark, knowledge is the only thing that multiplies when you split it. And by that, I wish you a wonderful afternoon and have a good time.